Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So I thought very long and hard about how I'm going to film this video. And mainly I've been struggling because I had this idea months ago. And then I just kind of struggled with how do you best present the information that I want to share with everyone and in a way that is more positive than negative. I don't want this channel to ever be just always 100% happy and positive because that's not life, but I also don't want to bring more negativity in the world than we need to. So I've had to think about how to do it. I've now retweaked how I want to present this, and I'm hoping it's kind of done in a way now where I'll be talking about something that's kind of negative and not great, but kind of putting a positive spin on it, sort of. So you've probably already seen from the title of the video, what I want to do today is recommend some, well, really it's just recommending some patterns to you. But the reason this came about is because there was a lot of chatter a few months ago about my favorite things knitwear, her patterns not being size inclusive, and there was just kind of like a spike. People are constantly talking about it with a lot of designers, her being one of them, because of the fact that she's a relatively big designer. So my intention with this video is I'm trying to encourage you to not knit my favorite things knitwear because she's not size inclusive, and to kind of focus on these other designs and other designers because they're creating beautiful work and they're size inclusive. For the most part, I do have to say currently the standard is like you need to offer a size that will fit someone with a 60-inch bust. And some of the designs I have kind of just fall short of that. And when I've included them, it's mainly been because they're free or because it's like they're out by like a centimetre or two. So for the most part, I've tried my best to make sure that they all fit someone with a 60-inch bust with the recommended ease and where it's the same for all sizes. And then, the person gets to choose if they want to go for a size smaller, larger, whatever. So I've tried my best, but I'm sorry if there are any patterns that I've got wrong. Please do feel free to let me know in the comments, and then I'll have to kind of either get rid of the video or change something, like we'll figure it out. But knowing that I've made a mistake is the best thing so I can fix it and do something about it. So that's my intention with the video. But in some ways, that felt like I was coming from a sort of negative place. So it could also just be that either, you like the designs by My Favorite Things Knitwear, but you just kind of always were like, I just don't see the need or desire to knit this pattern, but I do kind of like it. Here are some alternatives that, if you like that one, sort of. Then I've included some that are very similar, but I've included some where it's kind of gone a step further than what she has in her designs. And in some ways, it's also if you've knitted that pattern and you really liked it and you're like, I want something similar. It's kind of like with books when you read a book and then you're like, okay, I want something the same kind of style and vibe and gives me the same feeling. And that's sort of what this video is as well. If you like this, you might like this. That's kind of what I'm doing today. So I hope that's helpful and interesting. So let's start with the first pattern, and the pattern where I actually discovered My Favorite Things Knitwear and was like, I'm going to make this, and I bought yarn for it, and then I really looked at the pattern. I haven't bought the pattern. I looked at it on Ravelry ready to buy it, and then I was like, do I really want to buy a pattern and then show off a pattern by a designer where I'm the biggest size? Now, me being the biggest size doesn't bother me. As in, like, if I am that size, I am that size. What bothers me is that with my current body size and proportions, I shouldn't be the biggest size. That's what bothers me. Because it then means that if I make the sweater and friends of mine are like, oh my god, I love it, like, what pattern is it, I want to knit it, that I've got some friends who then wouldn't be able to knit it because they're bigger than me, and, I managed to just fit into the biggest size. And it breaks my heart. So I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Not going to knit them. And like I said, I'd highly encourage everyone to kind of also think about, yeah, you might love this pattern, but there's other alternatives out there. And hopefully this video will help. So sweater number 18 is a drop shoulder and has this beautiful, relatively simple textured pattern with what looks to be just knits and purls. And I've got a variety of different alternatives. Like I said, some that are very similar, some that start to go quite different. Let's get started. The first one I want to suggest is called Mari Nai. I believe that's how you pronounce it. If I pronounce anything wrong, I apologize. And if anyone knows how to pronounce some of the things that I pronounce wrong, please let me know. I always want to try and get better at that. And you can see with this pattern, it's drop shoulder. It has a beautiful texture all over it. Not the same, obviously, as sweater number 18, but it's the same sort of vibe. So this is one of those patterns where, like, if you like the one by my favorite things knitwear, then this could be kind of the next pattern you could try out. It has a couple of different textured patterns, and you could easily just kind of, you know, swap some out if you don't like them, or if you really like one, just do that one the whole way through. You can kind of play around with it, which is really nice. Then we've got, along the similar kind of vibe, is the Dustland sweater, where it's also a variety of different patterns that you kind of create with knits and purls. It does look to be a circular yoke and not a drop shoulder, but once again, it might be that, you know, you're looking for a textured pattern where it has a slightly different construction and a different fit, because circular yokes and drop shoulder jumpers definitely fit differently to each other. But that one's also kind of a fun one where you could also play around with the stitch pattern and kind of say, you know, I'm just going to repeat this one, or I'm going to alternate between two and not do all of the ones recommended. One that's a much more kind of simple design and related but different, so hard to talk about and describe, is the eyelet stripe hoodie, which has also a bit of texture. It does look like it's eyelets, so it's not just knits and purls that you're doing. But I think the beautiful thing there is you've got some of that texture, but you've got a hood. I love a hood. I've been getting a lot of wear out of my no sweatshirt, which has a hood, and yeah, I think it's just really cool. And you can always kind of choose to leave the hood out if you really don't like it, but I think that one's a really, really cool one if you're really into the textured jumpers. Then there's the Ingrid sweater by Petite Knit, of course. It had to be mentioned, and even though the texture design of it is very different to the original sweater 18, it's, you know, once again, it's a similar kind of vibe. It's drop shoulder. It has the same, well, it doesn't actually have the same neckline. I just know people have been modifying the neckline, and, you know, it's textured, so it is just similar vibe. Then one that's a bit different is called Lubell, which also looks to be drop shoulder, but instead of having the texture pattern kind of going all the way around, as in like the same thing repeating, it's kind of more like offset. So you've got these kind of pearl ridges only on one side and then not on the other, and you've got this little panel with what appears to be bobbles kind of separating it. I'm not a fan of bobbles, but I would just leave them out, and I think it would look really nice as a kind of textured pattern, but there isn't actually all that much texture. What you're really playing with more is space in a jumper, which I think is a really cool idea. Then the last textured pattern is called Happy Dance, and I think this is the one I really want to cast on sooner rather than later. I love the fact that you've got, so it's drop shoulder as well. I love the fact that you've got this moss stitch at the top, and then you've got this beautiful texture pattern, which looks to be quite similar to that of the sweater number 18. But I actually prefer this one because I think the moss stitch on the shoulders actually looks better. And people might disagree with me, but I think it actually makes like in the picture, it makes the shoulders look a bit narrower. I have relatively broad shoulders, which I sometimes struggle with. And so if something can make my shoulders look a little bit narrower, I quite like that. Or as long as it doesn't make it look worse. Because you do get certain patterns where it just looks even worse. And so it's nice when a pattern doesn't, the thing is, it does kind of draw attention to them, the moss stitch. But I think in a way that, yeah, I really like it. So that's sweater number 18. Then for sweater number 9, which is a raglan, very oversized, has a relatively high neck. And to be honest, you kind of can just go for any sort of raglan pattern and just change the neckline up. But here are some kind of patterns where I've really taken the raglan and the neckline as the kind of like main focus of the design. So first we have the classic. Now this is one of the patterns. It's free, but I think there definitely is at least one size missing to really call it a proper size inclusive pattern. But I wanted to include it because of the fact that it is free. So there you're kind of juggling with the issue of size inclusivity, but then also kind of juggling with the issue of accessibility from a kind of budget point of view. So this is a really good one where I think, from my point of view, I think it's perfectly fine to use this knitting pattern because it's free, and it means, if financially you can't always be buying patterns, use free patterns. There's some really good ones out there. And I should kind of also say, you should always use your own judgment. We all have our own values, our own beliefs and things like that. And I do kind of encourage you that if size inclusivity isn't something you really care about, maybe it should be, because even if you can knit every pattern because you're just, standard size and you fit into that kind of standard sizing, you might have friends who don't or family who don't, and to kind of put yourself in their shoes. But as you've already seen, I've included patterns by Petite Knit, but there is still a size inclusivity issue with her patterns. So I know some people choose not to knit from her patterns at all, even the ones that are considered size inclusive. And so it is just, I'm recommending the patterns that from my kind of look at them, I'd feel comfortable knitting, but that doesn't mean you will feel comfortable knitting them. And in some ways, that is a beautiful discussion to have about if one of the patterns I've included, you're like, well, I wouldn't knit that one. It'd be really interesting to hear why not, because then I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot of things, not just about size inclusivity, but a lot of issues within kind of knitting and the world. And so it's always kind of useful, instead of getting mad at each other, it's kind of starting that conversation. And I have had it that someone said, well, I do care about size inclusivity, but I want a jumper that fits me really well, and her designs fit me really well. And I get that, but at the same time, I do think it's worth, there's so many designs out there, and especially classic things like these designs I'm talking about, especially sweater number 9. I just don't think, in my opinion, that's a good enough reason. Because I don't believe that the fit is so drastically different to other raglans. So, just wanted to quickly mention that because I forgot to mention quite a lot of that at the beginning. So yeah, we've got the classic where it's, raglan, oversized, it's got a big high neck, and I think it's a really classic, beautiful pattern. It's being called the classic. So that's a really good alternative, but like I said, from a size inclusivity point, it isn't perfect. Not that we strive for perfection, but it doesn't meet the minimum requirements nowadays. But because of the fact it's free, I think it's a good one to still mention, because it's really good from its sizing. It's better than sweater number 9. Then we've got the Metropolis, and this is also a free pattern. And this one is size inclusive, and is kind of the pattern to go for if you really like the neckline, but you want like more drama, more intense, more coziness, because it has that really big kind of turtleneck. And the beautiful thing with this design as well is the ribbing, the fact that she chose with the design to make that a lot longer. I think that's a really nice little addition to it as well. Then the Daily Ritual raglan, I think, is just a beautiful like jumper on its own, but it is also very similar. And the beautiful thing from what I've seen in the pictures, I don't own the pattern, so I can't directly comment on this, but from the pictures on Ravelry, it looks like there might be some options for the neckline, or at least it's been kind of tweaked with in some of the sample pieces. I'm not too sure, but it definitely looks like there is kind of like a folded collar, a proper like big turtleneck, and then kind of more of like a stand-up collar. I'm not too sure, but I think that's a really cool one to check out. And you can always play with things like necklines, the hem of a sweater, and the cuffs of a jumper and stuff like that. And the last one for this one that I'm recommending is called White Mountains, which is a different neckline, but it's one of those really big oversized raglans, and the neckline is a bit more open, which I'm not a fan of. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know this. But I think it's a really good alternative if you like the kind of look of this kind of raglan, but you want a bit more of an interesting neckline. And I do think that Midori Hirase is really good with kind of providing different necklines. She typically has a couple of options in her patterns, but also I just find she never seems to go for like the standard sort of neckline I'd expect for a jumper. So she just always puts a nice little twist on some of the more like basic designs that she has. The next one is sweater number 6, and this one is also a raglan, and the main kind of difference is that it has an I-cord neckline, I-cord bind off on the sleeves, and I think it also has an I-cord bind off on the bottom of the body, but I'm not too sure about that one. And yeah, it's just a big, chunky, oversized raglan with I-cord. That's really it. So you can, once again, take any sort of raglan and just don't do the ribbing and do I-cord instead. That's really it. But once again, if you like that kind of look, maybe these patterns might also intrigue you. So first we have one where I'm like, I feel like it's taking the standard look of sweater number 6 and going like above and beyond with the beauty of this design. So the pattern's called Ryu, and you can see it's got I-cord, raglan, and then it has this beautiful stitch pattern down the side of the body. And I'm just like, genius, absolute genius, because it's just, you can leave it out or you can include it, and you've got 2 completely different jumpers. And if you like the fit, then it's already like 2 patterns for the price of 1, and I love it. And I think it adds something different, and adds something extra of taking a really standard classic kind of raglan design and just elevating it a bit and making it look even better. Love that one. A similar one that does the same sort of thing is called Autumn Forest. So you can see it's got I-cord at the bottom. It does have ribbing on the sleeves. But once again, the beauty of this design is that at the bottom of the body, you've got this beautiful design that you end up knitting. Looks to be like it's cable or like twisted stitches, something like that. And once again, I think it's just, taking a really classic design and just giving it a bit more and elevating it that little bit. And I think that's a really beautiful one that I really like to knit as well. Then we've got a design called Wrong Side, which it's more of, so I've included this as more of like, we're going into like the vibes of being a raglan but being a bit different. And this one is actually worn kind of inside out, so the purl stitches are actually facing out. And the really fun part is the ribbing at the top and the cuffs and things. You're using 2 colors, so just, it's a little bit of pop of color, it's a little bit fun. And the beauty of this design, which I really love seeing and starting to slowly, from what I've seen on Ravelry, become more of a thing, is not just having, like, here are my sizes, but actually recognizing that while there is, I think, no need for going, like, here are men's sizes and here are women's sizes, because I think it goes beyond that, and especially the labeling of that isn't correct, but kind of recognizing that people have different kind of standard body shapes, if that's what you kind of want to call it. So that, you know, yes, typically men have broader shoulders than women, but you also get women who have really broad shoulders. You also get women, you also get people who don't identify as men and women, but I like the fact when patterns are kind of split up into, these are the broad shoulder sizes, these are the standard, these are the narrow shoulder sizes, and then also kind of going, these are the sizes with, you know, bigger arm, like sleeve circumferences for people who have bigger arms and things like that, and splitting it into the actual characteristics of the body instead of trying to like assign it to be like, oh yes, this is for women. And like, you don't need to, you know, attach it to a gender. But so I like this design because it does that. It talks about the yoke depth and the arm circumference being different for those two sizes and like sizing groups, and I think that's a really great thing to see. A lot of work, I can imagine, but really great to see. Then the DRK Everyday Sweater is actually a circular yoke, I believe, but it is just, you know, it's an everyday sweater. It's also kind of like a standard design. You could also then, you know, if you didn't want a raglan jumper, but you wanted something sort of, yeah, just something different, and then you can just change out the ribbing. But I think it's just, once again, a similar kind of vibe. There's also the City Limits, which is, once again, pearl side is facing out. And with this one, the whole point of the design is that you're using two strands of fingering weight together to create like a DK worsted. And you actually fade from one color to the other. So I think it starts with two of the same, switch out one of the colors, and then two of the same again. And because you've got the pearl side facing out with this garment, that kind of fade that you create looks even better because pearl stitches hide transitions like that a lot better. And it's just a really beautiful design. The colors as well in the original sample are really beautiful. But that's just, once again, taking the kind of classic look and just, yeah, adding a bit more, amping it up, and just really beautiful. Then we've got the winter crop. So Jessie May is also a really great designer for beautifully designed, wonderful size inclusive patterns. And this one, while it is meant to be cropped and a bit more kind of fitted, you can obviously change that. And I think there's even some sample pieces that have been made bigger, like longer and more oversized. And it also is just a kind of classic design of a raglan, and it really lets the yarn shine, which I think is something that's quite similar to sweater number 6, that the yarn is really the thing that shines there for me, in my opinion. And then if you like the I-cord, you can always just include it in this other design. Then we've got two free designs. First is the gingerbread sweater. Now this is, once again, same issue as with what I previously mentioned. There is definitely at least one size, if not more, missing from this design. But because it's free, I wanted to include it. And once again, sizing wise, it's at least better, a lot better than the designs by my favorite things, Knitwear. Classic raglan design. It appears to have no decreases in the sleeves, which is similar to sweater number 6. And once again, you can just switch out the I-cord if you really like that. But I think it's also a really nice design because it's free to play around with and kind of add something extra and, yeah, just play with it. And then the final pattern is the flax, because it is just a standard raglan. It just has the pearl ridge down the arms, which you can include or not include. I've only ever made the like baby or toddler size of this jumper, but I'm thinking about making one for myself. I don't know if it will be the flax or the flax light. Not too sure. Maybe the flax light, just because I have more fingering weight yarn in my stash than worsted weight. And yeah, it's also free pattern, amazing range of sizes, all the way from, you know, newborn babies to adult sizes. And it just once again gives you like a little canvas to kind of play with and just add your own kind of textures and things like that, which I think is great. The next design is sweater number 7, which is a cardigan that has like a high kind of crew neckline, I think it's called. So not a V-neck, it actually sits like high, like my jumper, crew neck, and appears to be quite big, fluffy, no decreases in the sleeves from what I could see. And the first design that I think is really similar is the novice cardigan mohair edition, or you could also go for the chunky edition, which I recently made. And there are decreases in the sleeves, but you can just leave those out and then you get a very similar look. And it's also the crew neck cardigan as well, and just a very similar classic design as well. And then the same kind of look to that would be the Bonnie cardigan, which is also crew neck. It does look like it has some decreases in the sleeves and is also, you know, thicker yarn. Doesn't use fluffy yarn, but you just choose to do that anyway. And is also just a very classic fitting, well, classic looking, like fit wise. And then the Ramona cardigan is also crew neck, also a raglan, and yeah, just also the same kind of really classic cardigan. And then one that I've got, can you tell I'm excited for it because I didn't say much about the other patterns, is called Bramsche. I think that's how you say it. And it's the same sort of thing, classic crew neck, raglan, but it's actually a modified raglan construction, so that already intrigues me. But it also has a bit of like an eyelet lace kind of detail in the cardigan, and I'm like, yes, you've just like elevated the classic design, and you can just leave that out if you want. But once again, it's kind of, you know, getting more out of a pattern because you've got that design, and then leaving it out is really simple. And I think that one's just really beautiful. And then I've got a couple of patterns I wanted to suggest if you're not a fan of the crew neck, but you like the kind of look of this cardigan, but you want a V-neck. I personally prefer a V-neck because I find the crew neck only looks good when everything's buttoned up, and when it's not, it kind of just looks like it's hanging weirdly and flopping around weirdly. So first is the Burrow cardigan, which you can see from the picture, I think, is beautiful not just as a cardigan, but also just as a top, like standing on its own. And I think it's a really beautiful design, really clean, beautiful V-neck, and it is cropped, but once again, you can just lengthen that. Then we've got the Cottage, which is just, I think it's both the name and the look of the design. Oh my, it just immediately gives me super cozy vibes because it's once again, a classic kind of V-neck cardigan, and it just, I think it's also the picture. It looks like something I want to knit immediately because it looks comfy and cozy and just, amazing. Then the Champagne cardigan is another kind of classic, but with a V-neck. I think the button band is a double knit one on this design, so I feel like that needs to come with a warning because I did it on the Cosmo cardigan and they take a lot of time to knit. It's not easy. Requires a long time to knit that. And then my two kind of V-neck elevated designs, let's call them. First is the Timepiece cardigan by Albiona McLaughlin. I love her designs. Do you notice how often I end up mentioning her designs? Yet I've never finished any pattern by her. I own quite a lot of them. I've just never seemed to get around to actually starting them. And the one design I have started working on, I haven't finished, like knitting up. So I'm like, I need to get on that. And I own the Time Beast cardigan. I think it's just her style of designing, where it's a sort of vintage look from like a certain time period for all of her designs, made just that little bit more modern and more wearable in the current kind of world. If you don't like wearing vintage stuff, I think it looks great. I'm never going to wear it because I don't think it suits me. And so I think this design is just really, really beautiful and just goes a little bit above and beyond a normal cardigan. And then the last one, which I've been lusting after for since it came out, is the Lenore, because looking at it from, kind of the shoulders and just like the top part of the cardigan, you're like, oh yeah, standard V-neck raglan cardigan, nice. And then you see the colorwork design at the bottom, and it's just so delicate, intricate, and small, and just absolutely wonderful. So I just wanted to kind of mention those really quickly, just as a kind of alternative if you want to change up the neckline. And then the last pattern is vest number 1. So I am not a vest person, though I do own two like vest patterns or slip over patterns now, because I think I'm starting to see when you wear them and how I can make a vest that I think would actually suit me, because I think I just wouldn't look good in them. But vest number 1 is relatively oversized. It's also kind of the round crew neck, and yeah, just kind of standard slip over. So the first pattern that I think is relatively similar and would be something you'd like if you are interested in this vest is the Cora slip over. Now the difference here is it is meant to be a bit more tight fitting, and it is quite like big chunky yarn. But once again, that's a kind of, certain look that people like to go for. It's not my kind of vibe and what I'm interested in, but I still think it's looks wise, it's a really cool pattern if that's the kind of stuff you like wearing. And it is obviously fit wise different. You could potentially make a bigger size depending on your size. So just size up in the pattern, but obviously if you need to knit the biggest size, you can't go anywhere. But then you could just potentially play around with trying to do more increases, casting on more stitches and playing around with the construction. And yeah, I think it's just a really, really beautiful pattern. Then the holiday slip over, an absolute classic. I think it's very similar. It just has the split hem, which I think is really good for when you've got hips where the circumference of your hips is bigger than the circumference of your bust, and you're not a fan of having something be huge around your bust to be able to accommodate for your hips. So then you can go for a size that fits you really well around the bust, and the split hem then means that the jump or whatever you're knitting, in this case the slip over, doesn't sit super tight around your hips. If you don't want that, you might want it, you do you. And so I think a split hem can be quite nice for that. It's also quite good, as you can see in the picture, if you wear it with like skirts or dresses. And like from the look of this vest, I'm like, I feel like it's very similar. Then something that's a bit different is the Gondor vest, because it's a beautiful, relatively fitted vest, but it's done in ribbing. So it's, once again, you could just switch it out, just do it in stockinette if that's what you're after, but you can also, do one with the ribbing, one without, and yeah, you just kind of get a bit more choice. If it's easier to take away a certain design and a pattern that's like included, or a motif that's included in a knitting pattern, than it is to add something, because then you have to consider your stitch count, will it fit in there, and all these things. So that's a really nice one for just like wanting a little bit more than just the classic basic stockinette vest. Then the Othala is, once again, like with the Lenore, you look at it at the top, you're like, oh yeah, it's a slip over vest, cool. And then you see the bottom and the little bit of color work, and it seems like you knit like a row in a contrast color and bind off in that color, and it just looks so beautiful. And it just, once again, elevates that basic design and just makes it that little bit more interesting. And you can always just leave it out again. And then the final one, which I'm so excited to share, because I think this is like, if you want a slip-over vest where you can go basic, but then also kind of, start playing around and changing it up, this is the one. It's called the window pane vest. And as you can see, it's got this kind of striped, checkered sort of pattern. And you could just leave it out, and then you'd get a really simple classic vest. Or you could play around and include those stripes, but you could also, play around with different colors, or only go for certain stripes and not for all of them. And I think it really just lets you play around a lot more, which I think is really nice. So that's it. That's all the patterns. And I hope this hasn't, I know some designers don't want their designs compared to other people and be like, oh, this is the size inclusive version. And that's not really what I'm trying to do, because as you can see, the designs aren't exactly the same. But at the same time, I think that this might be a bit controversial, but, a designer might not want their pattern to be compared, but we compare. That is what we do. It's the whole thing of like, you should never compare yourself to someone else or will make you unhappy and miserable. But we do it nonetheless. And it's not just, I understand the designer wants to stand on their own feet and own two legs with their own designs and doesn't want it to be that people only knit it because it's like, oh, well, it's a size inclusive version of this designer. I get that. But at the same time, I think, promoting certain designs and the designers in this way of going, look, I know this pattern is really popular, but you might want to have a look at these people, is, I think, a really good way of encouraging more designers to be size inclusive. And for small designers, I'm not as strict with them being size inclusive, because I know it's harder to get test knitters. I also know it can be hard to kind of grade and figure out how design should fit for bigger bodies. And I completely understand that with smaller designers, but my favorite things in Knitwear is not a small designer. You can't have so many project pages on your designs and call yourself a small designer. So I think it's just not good enough. And I know that her last design or last two designs have been better with the sizing. They're still not great. So I think one of her latest designs, instead of just going to a 2XL, which is what she's been doing, goes to a 4XL. But the thing is, if you look at the actual size of the finished garment, you look at the recommended ease, the body size it would fit is still quite small. So and also it's the whole thing of, she calls it a 4XL, but most people would call it more of like a 2 or 3XL. So she's already kind of exaggerating what size it is. Now, I'm more than happy to admit that that is very likely the standard sizing in the country she's in, because I think she's in Denmark. And I know that in Europe there's a couple of places where, it might be a 42 in Germany, and then you go to France or Italy and it's like, oh, well, here that's a 44. So there's also that thing to consider as well, that I don't think she's doing it on purpose to mislead people. It's just, I think that's another issue that's going to come up if she includes, because typically people with size inclusivity are it goes up to a 5XL. And, well, some people can include a 5XL, but it might still not meet the requirements of size inclusivity, being size inclusive, because the size still isn't big enough. You've just called it a 5XL. You can call, if you wanted to, you could call the smallest size a 5XL. It's just confusing. So currently I'm just at the point where I'm not going to be buying or knitting any of my favorite things, any patterns by my favorite things knitwear. And while some people might think this is kind of promoting her patterns, I'm trying to just get people to see that there's more out there. And I've got another video planned of some of her designs, but I've also got a video planned for some patterns by Petite Knit. So like I said, I've included some of Petite Knit's patterns in here because they are size inclusive, but there's some other really popular patterns of hers that aren't. And I know she's trying to go back and fix them, but I've also got an issue with at least one of the patterns where she's done that. So once again, it's about using your own judgment to figure out what you feel comfortable knitting and, you know, investing your money in and things like that. Because I've also reached out to My Favorite Things Knitwear about her sizing, and it's just been ignored. And I was really respectful and not rude or unkind. It was just kind of asking, like, is something going to happen there? Because I currently don't feel comfortable knitting this, so. But I hope it's been interesting. I hope you've discovered some new designers, some new patterns, and just kind of even thought a bit more about the whole size inclusivity issue, and that it's not as simple as it in some way sounds, that which I think you've hopefully will have seen when I included some patterns that are free but don't fully count as being size inclusive, because you're dealing with two completely different problems there, and you need to kind of figure out which one means more to you. So it's a lot of different things, a lot of kind of tough topics to talk about, but I hope it has been insightful and helpful in some ways. And like I said, there'll be more of these types of videos coming, unless it goes really badly and I kind of go, cool, this isn't working how I wanted it to, so it's best just to get rid of the video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!